Welcome everyone. Today we're talking about IBAs, important bird areas, and some of the species that we study out there. For this session, we're going to be talking about saguaro nesters, including elf owls and gilded flickers. I'm delighted to introduce Jennie MacFarland, our bird conservation biologist at Tucson Audubon, who's been doing these surveys and conservation efforts for quite a while now, and so has a lot of really awesome data to share with us. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jennie.
Thank you, Kirsten. Yes, I'm Jennie MacFarland. I do work at the Tucson Audubon Society on staff, and I do a lot of different things at Tucson Audubon, but one of the main things I do is I co-coordinate the Arizona Important Bird Areas program. And we're going to start off talking a little bit about what that is. But first, let me share my screen. Okay, share screen, screen two. Okay. All right. So the Arizona Important Bird Areas program is a really interesting program. And it is statewide, but one of our priority habitat types has always been Sonoran Desert. So if you're ever been to Tucson or Phoenix or watching this from Tucson or Phoenix right now, you have encountered Sonoran Desert in some capacity. This photo here on my main intro slide is pretty, and also the photo behind me, it's pretty lush Sonoran Desert habitat. This is the type of Sonoran Desert you find more in the Tucson area, where it gets a little more green than the Sonoran Desert up in the Phoenix area, so upland Sonoran Desert. And the Important Bird Areas program does tend to focus on priority species. And two of our main priority species are, for Arizona, are elf owl and gilded flicker. And they're very interesting animals for sure. They're very, very cool creatures that are very, very closely tied with saguaro cactus, which is an iconic plant of Sonoran Desert. Okay, so if you want to know more about Arizona IBA, and we are going to be looking at the website as well. So this website right here on this slide, aziba.org, is the main sort of hub for Arizona Important Bird Areas program for a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons you might access that site. We use it to organize group surveys, so a lot of survey resources on that site. We also have a lot of sort of products, like results showcasing the different important bird areas of Arizona. So we do have a lot of partners in this program. The Arizona IBA program is co-run by two Audubons, which is rather unusual, actually. So the Tucson Audubon Society and Audubon Southwest, which is an office of the National Audubon Society, run Arizona IBA. We have a lot of support, both financial and just logistical support. That's very important to us and very helpful to us from Arizona Game and Fish. They have generously supported Arizona IBA for many, many years. And part of the reason the program here in Arizona is so active compared to other states is because of their ongoing support, which has been great. And they do that through their ABSI, the Arizona Bird Conservation Initiative. Next logo with is an initiative of Arizona Game and Fish. And our global partner, which I'll explain in a moment, but this is actually a global program, is BirdLife International out of the United Kingdom. So
Hey, Jennie.
Yes.
Your audio is just a little bit kind of unclear. I don't know if you can speak closer to the microphone or.
Yeah, I can certainly try. I'll also speak slower and louder to make
Okay.
sure that you guys can hear me.
Yeah, that already sounds better. Thanks.
Good. Okay, I'm scooting way in. So yeah, we do have a global partnership with BirdLife International out of the United Kingdom. So the Arizona's Important Bird Areas, there are 48 of them within Arizona. They cover all sorts of different habitats, and they cover the geography of them covers from north to south, east to west throughout the whole state of Arizona. So here's a little map on the right, just sort of showing where all 48 of them are. They also vary a great deal in size. Some of them are quite large, and actually our biggest one is a Sonoran Desert one, and that's right on this sort of, you can see my mouse, but right here on this really large one on the south end of Arizona is the Sonoran Desert Borderlands IBA, which is Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge combined with Oregon Pike National Monument. And both of those together make our largest important bird area. There's also this, which is Sonoran Desert. We've got a lot of elf owls and gilded flickers on it, but there's a big cluster of IBAs in southeast Arizona, which is not surprising because being down here in the Tucson area, there is quite a lot of excellent birding and bird habitat down here, and really sort of unique for the United States. So it really stands out, Southeast Arizona. But they are statewide. I mean, the Grand Canyon is an IBA. We have several along the Colorado River. So it's very much statewide, different habitats, different elevations throughout the state. And so 48 of them total, but 19 of them have global status. And the reason I mention that is this is where the species idea comes in, is that the IBA program is very focused. So all the 48 IBAs can come in, sort of that state level IBA can come in as a habitat situation or just a collection of many species of conservation concern. But once you start getting an IBA designated as global or continental, this gets really species focused because the global IBA program will call out a specific list of species that are of global conservation concern. And those species then can qualify a site, if they're in an IBA in sort of sufficient numbers, will qualify a site to be either of continental significance or global significance for that species. And this series we're doing right now of priority IBA species are all going to be species that fall within those categories pretty much. Are going to be birds that have sort of a special recognition in terms of really needing conservation focus, and Owls and Gilded Flickers are both in that situation. So that's why we're going to be focusing on them today, because they are really very interesting. I mean, there's such a species that we encounter so much if you're in the Tucson or Phoenix area, or have the possibility of encountering. But they're also just have this global status that's really important and sort of draws attention to the special Sonoran Desert that we have here. So like I did mention, the Arizona IBA program is a partnership between Audubon Southwest, Tucson Audubon, and Game and Fish, Arizona Game and Fish. And it's a very active volunteer-driven program. We've had over 500 volunteers in Arizona over the last 10 years. It's been quite a lot of people have helped, and many people have helped for many years in the program. It's a huge citizen effort. A lot of people involved in surveying, helping report animals or birds, as well as helping with data entry. And we've had a lot of people. And it focuses both on identifying important bird areas as well as monitoring. So we'll sometimes come in an area that we're interested in nominating, because we don't just pick. We have a science committee where we will, Feist or myself, my partner at Audubon Southwest, she and I will then who co-run the program, we'll nominate a site that we think would be a good IBA. We'll have done surveys at that area with all this volunteer help, and then a science committee will then review that application. So that's the process of identifying an IBA. We also have a lot of focus on monitoring existing IBAs to see how they're doing and especially how these priority species are doing. And we do a lot of species-specific surveying, as well as surveys that are just general all species. People will come and do a point count at a specific area, and we just monitor that year after year, season after season. Oh, there's an alpha. Here's the sound of an alpha. So alphas are a really interesting little animal. I'd like to hear maybe at the end from everybody here if anyone has ever actually seen an elf owl, but we all certainly have a very good chance if you are visiting or living in Sonoran Desert habitat, especially in the Tucson area, or that sort of upland, more lush Sonoran Desert, between I'd say mid-April into late July, and April through May especially, these birds call a lot. So you certainly have a really good chance of hearing an elf owl, and we can talk about where some of my favorite places are to go to hear them and try to see them. But they're very cool animals, and they actually have a distinction of being the smallest owl in the entire world. They are teeny tiny, very, very small owl. You can think of them as being kind of sparrow sized. They're not much bigger than like a white-crowned sparrow. They're very small. And they are a fierce predator, though. They are very tiny, and they are a fierce predator of tiny prey. So lizards, scorpions, centipedes, moths. They take a lot of moths. So if you're a tiny prey item, you must just be absolutely terrified of elf owls. Very effective hunters. They do a good job. And they also, so they're very closely tied to Sonoran Desert. So sort of culturally, when you see children's books or nature programs talking about Sonoran Desert, especially talking about saguaros, you'll often see elf owl called out as a resident of saguaros. And they do very well in Sonoran Desert habitat. They're often in that habitat type. Can be a kind of reliable place to find them, but they are a little more adaptable than that. They're not totally tied to the Sonoran Desert. They use it quite a lot. They have a robust population, but they will also nest in higher elevation habitat. And you can find them pretty readily in Sky Island habitat. That's going to be mountain ranges of Southeast Arizona. So if you were to go, say, into the Patagonia Mountains or up on Mount Lemmon, if you don't go too high, so around, I usually hear elf owls maybe at the Middle Bear stop on Mount Lemmon. Now, there's no saguaros up there, obviously, so they're using nesting holes in trees in those situations. So they're quite small owls, so they like pretty small nesting holes. So they'll use something like a Gila woodpecker hole in a saguaro, or even a ladderback woodpecker hole in a tree. So they're very kind of more adaptable than I think sometimes we think of them as being so closely tied to Sonoran Desert, but they branch out a bit and will go into other habitat types to nest as well. So let's hear their call, because this is kind of the most likely way you're going to encounter an elf owl. No, that's not what I wanted. So that's the male call of an elf owl, and it's quite an interesting call. Nothing really sounds like that in the night of the night sounds. They're pretty strictly nocturnal. They really only start calling after it's pretty much completely dark. Having done a lot of elf owl surveys, which we'll talk about, when you're there waiting and it's not quite dark and you're hoping to hear one, they really do wait until it's pretty completely dark. But especially in mid-April through May, they do call quite a lot, this male call, and it sounds very much like a laugh. It's a laughing call, and that is actually what they're named after, is the call itself, that it sounds so sort of, mystical and elf-like. That's kind of the idea. It helps also that they're the tiniest, so little great name, elf owl. This is their range map here, and how these range maps work. So this is the sort of map you see, say, in a field guide for birding, where the different colors are indicating sort of the status of the bird in that area. So the blue means this is the wintering range. So many of them, the migratory populations, do winter in Mexico. The purple is year-round. So there's a population in Baja that seems to be year-round, as well as kind of south central Mexico. The yellow place, part of the map, is where they migrate through. And then the orange will be where they migrate to breed. So what's really interesting is that this is in 3 groups, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the largest sort of migratory breeding population is here in southern Arizona and southwest New Mexico. So what's really interesting is that you have 3 separate migratory borderlands populations, and these do seem to be distinct from each other. They're distinct populations, and they do seem to sort of genetically be different. So that's really kind of interesting. And of note, there's no Sonoran Desert in these 2 Texas migratory populations. So, but we do have sort of our own sort of subgroup that's very Sonoran Desert and Sky Island mountain range tied that migrates up from Mexico. And then you have this Baja population that is not migratory, which is really kind of interesting. And I really always find this fascinating that bird species will have variability like this, because when you have, it creates sort of flexibility in your population. So if something goes wrong, it sort of gives you some resilience if something were to happen to, say, all the saguaros or something. So I always find it interesting when birds have these sorts of strategies, and elf owls do. And there are quite small, very, very small, so small that I wanted to cover that real quick, just how small they really are, because it's almost hard to imagine. And when you see them, something about the elf owl personality makes them seem a little bit bigger than they actually are. They certainly have that puffed up quality of aggressiveness, even though they're so tiny, that really makes them seem a little bit bigger. But for in reality, they are quite tiny. They are 5.8 inches in length and they weigh 1.4 ounces. Very, very small bird. And for comparison, a white-crowned sparrow is 6.7 inches long. It only weighs an ounce. So elf owls are quite compact. They weigh a little bit more than a white-crowned sparrow, but they're actually shorter in length. And a lot of that's going to be the tail. Elf owls have a pretty small tail, pretty short tail. And something like a white-crowned sparrow is going to have quite a large tail. But I also thought it was really interesting to compare the size of an elf owl to sort of the next sort of smallest owls that we have in southern Arizona. So a ferruginous pygmy owl is 6.7 inches. So, about an inch longer than an elf owl, but weighs 2.5 ounces. So nearly double what an elf owl weighs, a ferruginous pygmy owl. So definitely more of a weighty owl. And let's compare that to a western screech owl, which is also quite small. I mean, the size of a grapefruit or smaller, very small owl, and is also associated with nesting in saguaro cacti. When we do our surveys, we often find them territories pretty near each other, western screech owl and elf owl. The western screech owl is 8.6 inches in length and 5.5 ounces. So quite a lot bigger than that 1.4 ounces of an elf owl. So elf owls really are a very, very small animal. And they are fierce hunters. Here's some great photos of elf owls with their prey. This is the male. I think these photos were taken at Batistas by a professional photographer, where you had elf owls. This is a male bringing prey to his female in the nest. So they are strictly nocturnal. So they're going to go for things that are out at night. And they have very much a sit and wait strategy. And I've seen elf owls do this. They'll sit in a bush or a tree or in a something like a Palo Verde tree, say, and they watch and listen for prey. And then they pounce. They swoop down and pounce on it. And they go for very small prey, things like moths and crickets, lizards, scorpions, and many more. And they actually do quite well with scorpions. They catch a lot of scorpions. And we're going to have a little special view of that in a little bit here. And the habitat is quite variable. They do well in Sonoran Desert. This is a classic sort of place. This is in Floral Park West, where you would find elf owls. They're not back yet. So they are migratory here in southern Arizona. But so we usually get the first reports of elf owl, and it can vary a little bit by year. So 2021, they were very late. But usually they start coming back kind of late March, mid to late March. And it can be as late as early April, though. We've had years where there's none around that first week of April, hardly any, and then they come in a bit later. But usually by early April, they're around and you can hear them calling in the desert. Sonoran Desert is really quite a good place to look for them. And they are very, very closely related with those saguaros. So here's what they look like. Here's a little male peeking out of his cavity. Now, elf owls are not able to create holes in saguaros. They are what's called secondary cavity nesters. And they're very dependent on those primary cavity nesters, which are pretty much woodpeckers who create these holes in saguaros that then many other birds will utilize. So elf owls benefit very much from the activity of woodpeckers making holes in saguaros. This is a great photo from Jeremy Hayes, and we're going to talk about, I have a little slide later about how he got this photo. It's pretty. You may recognize that, just Starbuck uses this photo quite a lot. So Sonoran Desert washes is another thing to consider. If you are looking for an elf owl and you'd like to hear one and maybe even see one, you'd be pretty lucky to see one with a flashlight or something. But if you watch, especially if you watch above the horizon, you might see them fly in if they're coming towards you. That's the only way I've really ever been able to see them. I have heard probably 100 times more elf owls than I've ever seen. But if you want to try to encounter one, most likely hearing it, one of your best bets is to not just go into Sonoran Desert, but to go into a Sonoran Desert wash or adjacent to a wash. And this is something we've found in our surveys, that they're very closely associated with washes or sort of the habitat adjacent to washes. And when you're in Sonoran Desert, a lot of these trailheads happen, or many of them are near washes, so that can actually work out really well. But so for instance, that ends like the Sweetwater Sweetwater Desert hiking area of Pima County on the west side, that trailhead So you don't have to, just from the parking lot is right near a big wash. And that's a really good spot to listen for elk owl in the spring without having to worry about walking around in the dark. But those washes really have, we'll look at data in a little bit, but it really does seem to have a huge impact on elk owls clustering near washes. And I think that's mostly about prey, is they hunt a lot of moths and insects, and they're just going to be more abundant near a wash where it just gets more watered. So I think that's a big component. So washes are a key if you're trying to find an elk owl. They do very well on Sky Island. So here's a photo of Florida Wash. This is right at the base of the Santa Rita Mountains. Not saguaro in sight, but there are elk owls here, and they're nesting in little, holes, probably made by ladderback woodpecker, maybe even an Arizona woodpecker up in Sky Island habitat. And they'll nest in the hole of an oak tree or a sycamore, because sycamores can be natural cavities. I have seen elk owls nesting in sycamores. The one I have a photo of in a minute is in a woodpecker hole on a sycamore. So they do very well in Sky Island habitat. And if you're ever camping up in the Sky Islands at night and you think you hear an elk owl, you very well could, because they are pretty abundant and pretty good in Sky Island habitat. This is a photo I took with my phone through a scope. I did just scope this photo, and this was in the Huachuca Mountains in Ramsey Canyon. And I took this when I was leading a trip there for the Southwest Wings Festival, birding festival. And it was great. We found an active nest, and we heard elk owls calling as soon as it got dark, and we looking around and we saw this female poking her little head out of this really sort of perfectly sized hole in a sycamore tree. Her little face just barely fits. It's perfect, which cavity nesters seem to prefer as sort of as tight a fit as possible to minimize predators getting into their nest. But here she is, this little mama sticking her face out. As soon as it got even close to dark, she started calling and calling and calling. And she was asking for breakfast, basically. She just woken up, she's hungry, and she needs her male to bring her a tasty insect or a scorpion or something. So as we were watching as a group, it was really quite great. You could hear the male then responding from a nearby huge thick juniper where he must have been roosting. And he had now woken up too, and he's calling back and he's hunting, and we'd see him every now and then flutter up and transfer prey to her. So it's pretty cute. And there's a close-up of her. So it's a little female peeking out of her nest. And we've had some interesting situations with nest boxes as well. So elk owls are cavity nesters, and cavity nesters are always if you're doing from a conservation point of view, nest boxes often come out with cavity nesters. And this is a friend of ours, Kate, and she did have a bluebird trail. She had set up nest boxes for bluebirds that had lots of eastern bluebirds, the azure, sort of Mexican subspecies of eastern bluebird, nesting in her boxes. And this particular box, she called us and we came and checked it out because she had an elf owl that was nesting in this bluebird box. This is the elf owl itself. And she had this, presumably the same pair of elf owls, I don't know, but she had elf owl in the same box year after year every spring. So that was really interesting. And it looks like they took over a bluebird nest because all that grass and everything in there looks like an old bluebird nest. But the elf owls would just lay their eggs right on top of it year after year. So we peeked in and got a photo and then closed it and left her alone. But it was really interesting to know that this can work in Arizona. We've tried it ourselves, but we haven't quite figured it out. There's someone else in Portal who has had success with elf owls nesting in boxes. We tried putting nest boxes in Sonoran Desert for elf owls, and it didn't really work. Birds used them, but it wasn't elf owls. The flycatchers loved it. The ash-shoulders flycatchers, they use those boxes like crazy. But we had trouble getting elf owl to use them, and I think it might be something they do more in the Sky Islands than in the desert. That's certainly what the evidence, or limited evidence, is pointing to. Someone did do this in Texas. They did a study on nest boxes for elf owls. Had limited success, and our desert one has had limited success as well. So that's kind of an interesting thing that we still could pursue. So elf owl surveys is something that we do every year. We've probably done them. I can go to the active data because this is a screenshot, but I think we've done them for the last 5 or 6 years, and they've been a huge hit. They're wildly popular. And so this is a screenshot. I'll show the active map in a moment and tell you how you can find it too. But this is a screenshot map of elf owl results from our Important Bird Areas annual spring survey. And it's really fun. And we do it in partnership with Saguaro National Park, as well as Pima County for Tucson Mountain Park. And they give us special permission for our volunteers to come into these areas after dark. Normally no one's allowed. And the Park Service even sends rangers to help with the survey, interns, several interns usually, and then a ranger or two to help. And it's a lot of fun. Everyone really has a good time on these surveys. And this is sort of a sample results map for last year's survey, 2022. And here, for the West, Tucson Mountains IBA west of Tucson. And then our separate IBA, the Tucson Sky Islands IBA. So this is basically Saguaro East, plus some other lands, but where the alphals are is Saguaro East, and our results for over there. So let me show you our actual map here. So this is I'm trying to say, like a Google map that's interactive, where you can Google, you can zoom in. Anyone can. This is available to the public, and you can see where they are. So I have a key here on the left. So alphals are the little brown bird faces. If you click on that, the notes show up. So this was seen by Kirsten. I clicked on your alphal by accident. Kirsten Howe and Olia Weekly of Tucson Audubon found this alphal last spring. Coordinates and the fact it was 15 meters away, quite close to the location. So clicking on the data, and this one was 10 meters away. So you can click on this and see what people found. It's really cool, and you can see people's notes if they have them. So heard at least 2, maybe 3, flew right by me. About 15 feet away, landed on the road. Okay. And then this one, Bellevue parking area. So yeah, people have notes on here, and you can turn off and on layers. It's really cool. These Google My Maps are really interesting. It's been really helpful for us to present data. So here's the data from 2021. The gray dots mean a count was done, but no owls were heard. But we also record other species too. So the yellow icons are Western screech owls. You can see what people have there. So call and response to that. So that's part of our survey protocol. So these interactive maps are really fun, and you can access them through our website. So if you go to the Arizona Important Bird Areas program, which is aziba.org, and you go to survey resources, we have pages here on all the different surveys we do. And for instance, you go to alpha, and then we have, this is our protocol. So we use this to organize the surveys. So anyone who helps with these surveys, this is sort of our hub for downloading protocols, or we use a specific audio file for the survey. And then we have this that same map we're looking at. If you click this, you view it in full frame, which is what we were already doing. So that's how you can access them too. And we have these for many of the surveys that we do, especially the species-specific surveys. So if you're wondering about the trograph surveys we do, or any of the other sorts of surveys you may hear about, we do organize everything and as well as share results from that website. So you can check them out yourself, and it's kind of like that. I like making everything sort of as available as possible. I like to share it. We do share this data with the Park Service in Pima County, and they love it. They love the fact we do these surveys. Go over to the east here, and you can see some of the areas people get into, and look how dense some of these areas are for alphal. It's right here up the Madonna Ranger Station. So this is someone affiliated with the park who helped us, and getting just tons of results here. It's pretty cool, female mew call. So yeah, so alphals are a real fun time, and we have a lot of fun with the surveys. And I just wanted to show a little bit some of the fun we have. So one thing I've started doing, we had to do a few innovations for the IBA survey programs that we do when 2020 happened. We had to really shake things up a little bit and use some of the modern technologies available. So we started doing things like meeting online and having people do their data entry through online portals. But another thing I started doing was Google Albums, where people, and I invite everyone who helps with different surveys. And I started doing this for a lot of efforts now, but we did them for the alphal surveys last year. It was a lot of fun. And then people who helped would share photos for the group to see. So there's some nice selfies of happy surveyors before it got dark, getting ready to do their survey. And then we had lots of nice photos of the moon rise over the saguaros, and then the sunset photos and some unusual birds people saw. And this is one of mine, actually. I had of all things, I had a Virginia rail in Saguaro Park East during the survey. It was the craziest thing I ever saw. My younger sister was helping me with the survey. She spotted it, and I got a great photo, and that was a really cool eBird report I got to do. But some photos of owls, people doing selfies, and it's just really fun to see how much fun. Oh, it's a cool photo with a moth coming into the ocotillo blossoms. But there's a great horned owl on a saguaro. Took it with their phone. But yeah, so people have a lot of fun on these surveys. We see a lot of cool critters out there, and it's pretty fun to be in the parks after dark when you're allowed to, and it's happening in partnership with the park. So here's a video that Olia got, and the caption is great. She took this through IR binoculars, infrared binoculars. This is a screech owl, but a pretty good video with one. So the surveys are quite fun. People, I think, really enjoy them. And presentation here real quick. So that's sort of going over the results of the annual elf owl survey, but we do record all the nighttime critters we encounter. Another thing that's really interesting about elf owls is we're doing our survey work in IBAs, important bird areas, which aren't really urban. They're kind of urban adjacent. Saguaro National Park is pretty urban adjacent, but it's not urban. It is a national park. But if you look at eBird and see where people report elf owls, you'll see some spots within the city. So here's Tucson. You see some spots right within urban, especially suburban, where it's not quite so densely urban, parts of Tucson and Phoenix. And it's really interesting to think about, because that means that there's something like, if you live in one of these areas, if you live in suburban Phoenix or Tucson, or even sort of suburban, on the edges of Sky Island or something, there's things you can do that could possibly help elf owls in terms of improving your little bit of habitat for them. And if you have dense canopy or watch-side habitat is important for them, for their hunting, for finding their prey. And if not, you could plant, if you have a watch, maybe plant some more baby native trees or something like that to help in the long run. And vinyl-rich habitat is really best to provide them with that insect prey. They need something with cavities, so saguaros or trees with cavities. So maybe if you have a tree that's died, a snag, leaving it there if it's safe to leave, so that it could provide a home for them. And then you really want to use insecticides as little as possible if you're in what you think might be elf owl habitat. If your yard could be elf owl habitat, because they really need those insects for them to hunt. Now, I do have a little video. I can't help but share this. It's so cute. I love it. It's this was done by PBS. I'm gonna go full screen. There shouldn't be an ad, but it's talking about the elf owl in a different habitat. So this is part of that Texas population, but it's a really good look at it.
Voracious predator is closing in on Big Bend. Flying through the night, he has come from the south, where he spent the winter waiting and preparing for his journey north. For the next 5 months, he will bring a swift and silent death to countless creatures of the Big Bend night. He is an elf owl, the very smallest owl in the world, barely 5 inches high and weighing less than a tennis ball. But for elf owls, size truly doesn't matter. They'll tackle prey almost as big and powerful as themselves. This male elf owl now has a partner. She's moved into their nest, an old woodpecker hole in a giant agave stalk. Sitting on eggs, for the next few weeks, she'll need him to do most of the hunting. And when she's hungry, she lets him know all about it. From dusk to dawn, the male scours the surrounding desert, for fresh supplies. After all his efforts, he seems tempted to have a quick snack on the job. But Mom is not impressed. Sitting on 3 ravenous chicks, she's not tolerating that kind of behavior. Every scrap of food is precious now. And with another 3 or 4 weeks before the young leave the nest, this extraordinary little father is facing many more hunting missions through the long desert nights.
I love that. I love that so much because it really shows the personality of elf owls, the fact that that the little call the female made, where she's doing kind of like the laugh call, but much more rapidly and without taking a breath. That's what we heard them doing in Ramsey Canyon when the female was peeking out of the sycamore tree. It's just so cute. It really is, and really shows their fierce attitude. And him catching a scorpion, that's pretty cool. So that's readily available on the internet. It's a little 3-minute video from PBS. Another thing is, before we move on to Gilded Flickers, is I want to talk a little bit about how elf owls have been encountered by people we know here at Tucson Audubon. So this is from Doris Evans, who took this photo of an elf owl and said she found it in her yard. It was the first in her yard that she had heard verdins going berserk, which is often how one can find owls if they're getting mobbed by daytime birds. And they were going berserk, chirping and fluttering at something. I looked out to see what was going on, and here was this elf owl. So this is a bird who was trying to sleep in a tree, and the little birds found him. And here's one from Jeremy Hayes, who took that familiar photo that, if you've ever logged like volunteer hours into the Tucson Audubon system, you've seen this photo. But so it's from Jeremy that this little guy poked his head out of a hole long enough to get a look at me and decided he wasn't having any of it. So this is in Catalina State Park. So full of personality. They're very much pint-sized, but amazing birds and very much an IBA priority species. Find out the map later, turn this off for a second. So gilded flicker is our other species we're going to cover here in this sort of, key birds of the Arizona IBA program series. And this is a woodpecker. They're quite a large woodpecker. And they have a really kind of interesting species history where for a very long time they were considered all the same species with northern flicker, considered kind of a separate subspecies, but just, a different population of northern flicker, basically. But in 1995, they were split as their own distinct species. And that's good because they really are pretty different. They're smaller than northern flickers. They have some physiological differences, which we'll talk about. And they're very, very, very tied to Sonoran Desert, as well as saguaro cactus and other columnar cactus, which we'll talk about in a minute. They're smaller than flickers, northern flickers. And one of the best ways to tell them apart is the cinnamon tap. It's a pretty distinctive sound. If you've ever hiked in desert, near high quality desert near Tucson and Phoenix, you've probably heard this. That call, very distinctive call of the gilded flicker. This is a little range map here showing where they occur. It's quite a limited range, very, very small range, and it's purple because they're not migratory. They move around a little bit in the winter. They might move closer to riparian zones, but they don't leave the region. They just kind of move around a little bit within their habitat seasonally, but they're not really migratory. This is an eBird map showing kind of a much more detailed range map where they actually occur, and it's pretty much southern Arizona in the Sonoran Desert habitat down into northwest Mexico, and then Baja, bits of Baja. And why that's so interesting to think about is look at this map. So this map here on the right, and look how closely they correlate. I can't believe this. This map on the right is from the Desert Museum, and it's showing where Sonoran habitat happens, exists in the world. So this darker orange color is Sonoran Desert habitat, and the little green icons here is showing the range of saguaros. So you see here on Baja, there are no saguaros, but there is a different, very similar cactus to saguaro. But look at how the outline of Sonoran Desert sort of perfectly matches where you get gilded flickers. This is an iconic species of Sonoran Desert found pretty much nowhere in the world. And this is why flicker in Baja without eating morals, because in Baja they have a different cactus called cordon. So the cordons are kind of like a mix between a saguaro and an organ pipe, and they're very, very large. So they're like quite a large columnar cacti, and functionally, in terms of how, as long as the birds are concerned, they are similar to saguaro. So here's some really nice pictures I got from eBird. Here's the link. So this is from Bob Bowers and Jonathan Burgess. Photos they took in Baja of gilded flickers sitting on top of cardons. And boy, you'd be forgiven for thinking that's a saguaro, looking at it as a close-up, because they actually are closely related and quite similar cactuses. But they do occur in different parts of Sonoran Desert where you don't get saguaros. Now in Arizona, our Sonoran Desert, we don't have cardons naturally in Arizona, but they are in Northwest Mexico and into Baja. So that's how gilded flickers are using areas outside of saguaro populated Sonoran Desert. Now, a really interesting situation too is trying to tell them apart from northern flicker, because we do get northern flickers in Arizona. Now, our northern flickers here are red shafted, typically, almost always. And so this bird on the left is a northern flicker. This photo was taken in Arizona, so this is the red shafted subspecies. You can get yellow shafted northern flickers in the eastern part of the United States, but out here they're pretty much red shafted. And this on the right is a gilded flicker. So I chose this photo on purpose because you can't really see the gilding so much. So what I mean by the reason they're called gilded is because they have these lovely yellow shafts. So back here on this photo, all that yellow in the wing, it really shows on the shafts of their feathers, especially when their wings are open. It's quite striking, actually, when you see him flying through the desert. But this guy's wings are closed. You can see a little bit of the yellow under his tail, but let's ignore that for a second. But because there's other differences. One of the best ways to tell if you're looking at a gilded flicker versus a northern flicker is the head. So on the head of a gilded flicker, this photo on the right, they have a cinnamon colored cap that is on the front of their head, but it goes all the way to the back of their head. It sort of goes right through the eye, and it's kind of the whole top of their head is cinnamon colored. Whereas in a northern flicker, they do have that cinnamon in the front, like on the forehead, but it doesn't extend over the top or to the back of the head. So that's a really key difference. There's some other differences too, like the shape of the black patch on the chest. I find those a little tougher to distinguish. The cap is really a big one. Also, seeing the yellow in the wings really helps too. But if they're sitting there with their wings closed, look for that cap. That's a really, really good way to tell them apart. We do surveys for gilded flickers. Well, these happen during the day, and they're also in partnership with Saguaro National Park and Tucson Mountain Park. They give us sort of special permits to do playback on these surveys. And again, I do have interactive maps that you can look at on our website about this, on that Arizona IBA website. And they're a lot of fun. And I'm going to be doing both these survey efforts again this year. And what I've decided to do is anyone who, I'll be announcing those dates and opportunities very soon, next week. And anyone who has signed up for this talk will be hearing about that opportunity, along with those who've helped in the past as sort of my first round of recruitment. So congratulations for being at this talk. You will be hearing about the surveys this year, sort of before the main Tucson Audubon audience, just a little bit. But what's really interesting to think about with gilded flickers is the fact that they're so restricted to a certain habitat type. They're only in Sonoran Desert, and only in Sonoran Desert that has lots of sort of columnar cacti for them to nest in. They also have really interesting dietary restrictions too, where they're really focused on ants. And this is true of most sort of flicker populations. They really cue in on ants. I think they'll eat other insects too, but ants are very important for them. So they need to be in Sonoran Desert habitat that has a soil quality that's high enough for ants, as well as enough moisture, and whatever ants need to survive is where you're going to find gilded flickers in Sonoran Desert. But what's really interesting is that Sonoran gilded flickers have been declining, and this is part of the reason they're such a high priority species for Arizona IBA. So this is a quote from a paper from Rosenberg, where gilded flicker populations from the U.S. have reported to decline by an estimated 54% between 1970 and 2014. So that's quite a steep decline. And this is a really interesting product from eBird, this map on the right. I got this directly from eBird, and I'll show you where to find it too. It's really cool to see some of these products. And what this map is showing us is trends of abundance within IBA reports. And you can see the red areas are where they've declined, and the blue is where they seem to be increasing. So it's pretty interesting to look at, and the white is where they statistically can't tell. But this is a pretty interesting map to look at. And where I got that, and I wanted to show this to you guys real quick, is I went to Science, Explore Species, put in Gilded Flicker, and then they have things like this abundance map that you can zoom in on. eBird has all these amazing tools that you can use. It's so cool. And then there's this is the trends map I was looking at, but this one's live, it's interactive. You can click on it and see what they mean. You can see their actual map. So the white circles, if you want to see, you can turn it on, but it does say not significantly different from 0. So they're not hitting the R value. So I just turned those off. But it's really interesting, some of the amazing products that eBird has created that you can click around and see for different species. It's very, very cool. I highly recommend checking some of this stuff out. And another thing eBird does, which is really cool, is they make it possible for people to post their photos and videos, and then we can all look at them later. So this is from Andrew Spencer. He posted on eBird. Here's a nice video of a gilded flicker. Look at that cinnamon cap. That's cactus wren singing, not a gilded flicker. And the Sonoran Desert cactus wren. But really large bill, kind of a small. Flickers are large woodpeckers, but for a flicker, this is a pretty small. And gilded flickers are smaller than northern flickers. And lovely little red mustache in this male with the cinnamon cap is really showing nicely. And you can see a little bit of the yellow under the tail. But I like this video because it kind of shows their movements and off. So eBird is certainly a great resource, a really fun way to encounter all these sorts of things. And here's that interactive map that you can access via our website. And you can zoom in and see where people have seen these different flickers. Now for this map, these are all flickers, but the different colors indicate different statuses. So pink are pairs of flickers, and the yellow are single individuals that were spotted along with their notes. Male flew to the nearest saguaro. So that really cool interactive map. You can see where the routes are to, and places people did call back but didn't have a response. Another thing we do with the Important Bird Areas program is outreach. So it's really important to designate these areas, as well as to sort of raise awareness among managers. So like Saguaro National Park and Tucson Mountain Park, and Coronado National Forest, which is part of that Eastern IBA, the Sonoran Desert Uplands IBA, it's very important to them, the IBA status. And these managers use it in their planning and in their reports, and when they're doing sort of recreation plans or whatever. This can be very helpful, but it also is something we try to reach the public about. And one of the ways we do that is signage, but also IBA dedication events. So last August of 2022, we did have an IBA dedication of the Tucson Mountains Important Bird Area. We did this as part of the Southeast Arizona Bird Festival. We had a lot of people attend, even though we had this event in August in Sonoran Desert. And because of those, because it was so hot this August, we did make it an evening event, and it was a lot of fun. It was great. So the Saguaro National Park was the host at their visitor center, which was very, very nice. We had a mothing station with help from Pima County's Jeff Babson, and we did a Creatures of the Night walk through the wash right near the visitor center, which was really great. Help from Jim Rohrbar, I really appreciate it. And then we also did this ceremonial, giving of the sign. That's always a big component of an IBA dedication, is the custom sign being handed over to the land managers that they can then post to showcase this important bird area and indicate that it is an IBA. And unsurprisingly, the sign that we gave them featured 2 species, and that was elf owl and gilded flicker. So the art on this sign is a little elf owl looking out of a hole in a saguaro, and a gilded flicker flying up to the saguaro. Now we did 2 different versions because there are 2 different IBAs that have these species, as a priority qualifying species. And the eastern one, so it's Tucson Sky Islands IBA. Sorry, that's the one. So Saguaro Park East plus the Catalinas and the Rincon Mountains. It's quite a large IBA. That's a global IBA. So that's their sign on the left that they've been given. And the one on the right is for Tucson Mountains IBA, since that has, and that's why the logos are different on the bottom, because there's just different lane managers associated with each of these IBAs. So there's Pima County lands in the Tucson Mountains IBA, and there's, state parks lands in the eastern one, so Arizona State Parks, and National Park Service has it in both, and the Forest Service in the eastern one as well. So it all comes back around to these two species for these IBAs, and they're pretty good ambassador birds, that's for sure, for making people care about these IBAs. So let me stop sharing my screen, and let's see what's going on with comments and any questions people might have. All right, so I hope that was loud enough. I apologize for my microphone situation, but does anybody have any questions?
And please feel free to unmute yourself if you do. I don't believe anything came through in the chat.
Well, I'd also be interested in any stories anyone might have if you've encountered elf owl or, gilded flicker. Oh, I see new messages that I didn't see. Let's see what those are. Okay. You commented an owl and a scorpion. That's right, because those elf owls take a lot of scorpions. It's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize that. How do they not get stung?
I think they're pretty good at it. I mean, there's a few things that will hunt scorpions, and they tend to be somewhat immune to the sting, but they also have this strategy pretty quickly of just sort of biting off the end of the tail. Now that video from PBS showed the owl with the scorpion, and the stinger was intact, so they must not react too badly to them, because they take a lot of scorpions, so they have that figured out.
That's
not
pretty
sure
cool.
exactly how.
All right, any other questions?
Well, I have a last comment. So there's something I forgot to. I was afraid I was going to run out of time. I had so much to cover. But another thing we've been doing with elf owls that's kind of fun is we've been using our sound recorder units. So these are electronic devices that you can put out in the field. We attach them to dense trees and like Sonoran Desert habitat with permission from Pima County. And we put these out and have them, you program them to turn on and off and just recording ambient sound. So I programmed them to start recording at sunset for a few hours, and then to do the few hours before dawn, since those are the most active periods for owls, is right after sunset and then right before dawn. It's kind of like you can think of day birds being most active after sunrise, and then right at the evening. It's similar at night, right after right after the sun goes down and then right before it comes back up. And we put them out at various places to see how many elf owls we could capture on the sound recorders. And one of the main reasons we did this, I did this in April of 2020 because I couldn't do organized surveys that year. It was too soon after everything locked down. So we put up sound recorders, and we're going to be analyzing that data soon to see if one of my main questions was, I had them out as the phases of the moon changed, the recorders. So I wanted to know if how often they called changed as the moon phase changed, which people have written papers about, not necessarily with elf owl exactly, but with other small owls of, do they call more or less frequently as under a full moon versus like a new moon? And I found a lot of research, and a lot of it was completely conflicting, opposite conflicting. Some said they call most during a full moon. Some said they call least during a full moon. So I wanted to do it for myself. So I did get data from that, and we're going to, and we'll be analyzing that soon. So that'll be pretty fun. So I do see a question about how often you conduct the surveys. So how that works is the elf owl survey is a coordinated effort where we go out as a group with special permission from the National Park, as Tucson Mountain Park. And they're usually late April or early May. This year, they're going to be in early May. And we do one night for the eastern part of, east of Tucson. So Saguaro Park West. Excuse me. We do one night, we sort of split it into two. So on one night, we do the east side, so Saguaro Park East, and a little bit of some Forest Service land where you might get elf owls in Catalina State Park on the east side. And then on a different night, we do the next night, we do the west side. So that's Saguaro Park West, and as well as Tucson Mountain Park. And they're always the first few days before the full moon. And we do that for safety reasons, because it's a lot easier to see where you're going for those, if there's some moon in the sky. And also, I do think the owls call a little bit more under a full moon. And so that's when we tend to do those. And so they're gonna be the first week of May this year. They've usually been in April, but the way the moon phases are working, it's gonna be the first week of May. And the Gilded Flicker surveys start late March and go through April. And how those work is you sign up, those are a little more independent. You sign up for a trail, like a route, and then on a morning of your choice, you do that route, stopping every 200 meters and playing a flicker call and recording on a data sheet if you get a response, and if whether it was a single or a pair. So that's sort of GPS marking where you're getting flickers throughout the two areas of the big Sonoran Desert IBA east of Tucson and the one west of Tucson. So I'll be announcing those opportunities, those sign-up opportunities very soon, and you guys will be hearing about it in the first round.
Awesome. That sounds great. Also, I look forward to your presentation once you have the sound data back.
Oh yeah, we got to we got to do a sound recorder talk. It's gonna be cool.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, I want to know if the moon phases.
Yeah, because there's software that you run the audio through, and it uses sort of like AI almost to look for us. You tell it, this is the sound I'm looking for, and then it starts pulling it out of the data. They start getting sort of like, you can kind of put that into a graph almost of, okay, on these times we had this many calls, that kind of thing. That's really cool.
That is really cool. So you don't have to go through it all by,
No, you don't sit there and listen to it all. You can. I mean, they're regular audio files, but there's special software that is a little tricky to use, but once you get it, it works very well at pulling out sort of the sound, your target sound.
Very cool. That's awesome. Oh, let's see. Tim and Jean asked, what time of year is the Gilded Flicker survey?
Yeah, the flickers, they start really kind of being on territory early March, but we wait to mid March through April, because that's when they're really on territory, and usually in pairs, because we try to get as many documented pairs as possible. And the reason for that is just IBA logistics. It has to do with when you're trying to report on how suitable an area is for your key species, individuals versus pairs are weighted differently. So we try to document as many pairs as possible, so it's mid-March through April.
Awesome. Okay, are there any other questions? I will send out a follow-up email probably tomorrow with the link to the recording on YouTube. Can also include some of these resources that Jenny has talked about in the talk, especially links to that IBA website where you can find information on getting involved in surveys. We'll make sure to include that. So if there are any other questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. What do you think, Jenny?
Thank you all so much. You're a great audience. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us. So we hope to see you back here again for another virtual event.
Oh, I guarantee it.
Thank you. Bye.